Now, some of you aren't working on the Sabbath, but you're not resting and relaxing either. So when you head back to work, you're even more exhausted than when you started the weekend. And I'll give you a good example of this. Some of you have children who play ball on the Sabbath. Tournaments, makeup games. Now, I know what you're thinking. You think, well, Pastor Allen, that's not work. And maybe it's not. But is it restful and relaxing? Be honest. No. Are you worshiping God? No. Do you go back to work on Mondays more exhausted than when you started on Saturday morning? Yeah. In that case, you're breaking the Sabbath. And you're teaching your children to break the Sabbath. Now, I realize we're not under the ceremonial law anymore. But you need to realize that the Sabbath was created for your own good. Yeah. You weren't created for the Sabbath. People, the Sabbath was created for you. It's kind of interesting. Jesus was walking through a wheat field one day. And if you've never done this, you probably don't understand the story. But as they were walking through the wheat field, some of the disciples were a little bit hungry. So they took the head and they would rub it. And what they were doing is getting the chaff separated from the grain. And they blow it off and pop it in their mouth. Well, some of the Pharisees saw this and they said, whoa, 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 whoa. You're working. You broke it off. You're winnowing it. You're coming in and getting all the chaff off. You're blowing it away. That's work. You can't do that. You're preparing your food. And Jesus, of course, has to go off. But one of the things that he said that was so good, he said, you need to understand something. Man was not created for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was created for man. In other words, it was created for our good. God didn't create the Sabbath and say, well, I need someone that's going to observe it because it's so important. No, he said it's so important because man needs it. And we need to realize that. So, the Sabbath was created for our own good. And, in fact, the Sabbath falls under the category of the moral law. If you're not familiar with the law, and this is why people get confused when they get to the New Testament, the Jews categorized the law in three ways. You had the civil law, you had the ceremonial law, and you had the moral law. Jesus said that I've not come to do away with the law, but to fulfill the law. And because he's fulfilled the law, we're no longer underneath the law. So here's what most people think. Most people think if Jesus said that he's fulfilled the law, we're no longer underneath it, then we're not under any of the law. And people, that's not true. We're not under the ceremonial law because that's the category that Jesus fulfilled. How many of you know the difference between civil law, ceremonial law, and the moral law? The civil law was the law that pertained only to Israel. When we look at the year Jubilee, some of you get all excited because these Bible teachers talk about the year Jubilee and how it actually refers to you as Christians. No, it doesn't. The year of Jubilee was a way to make sure that the families kept the family land that was allotted to them when they came into the promised land within the family. Someone got poor and needed some money, they would sell off the family land. Well, to make sure that the family always kept it, on the year of Jubilee, the land went back to the original family owners. That way the land stayed with them. When Jesus returns, he's going to actually allot that land again, and everyone that's in a certain family, they're going back to their family land. Yeah. Levirate marriage doesn't apply to us. That only applied to Israel. So many of the laws that only apply to Israel don't apply to us today. That's why we don't keep the civil law. The ceremonial law was the way that you actually took care of sin. And if you were unrighteous, you could be made righteous again. So if you sinned, you would bring forth a sin offering, and then you would also bring forth a burnt offering. Because the whole purpose of getting rid of your sin was in order to have fellowship with God. So you never brought a sin offering or trespass offering without also bringing a burnt offering or a peace offering, so that you could fellowship with God afterwards. But today, when we sin, we don't take a sin offering and kill a lamb. We don't do any of that. Why? Because Jesus is our sin offering. He's our peace offering. He's our burnt offering. He's fulfilled all of that. And he's done it once for all times. So we're no longer underneath the ceremonial law. But what about the moral law? What's the moral law? It's the law that tells us what's right and what's wrong. People, it was wrong to murder people before Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. And it's still wrong to murder people after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. When Jesus comes back during the millennium and he rules over this earth with a rod of iron, it will still be wrong to murder. Yeah. It was wrong to steal before Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. It's still wrong to steal after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, and stealing will be wrong in the millennium. The moral law continues on. Lying, coveting, all of those type of things. Now here's what's interesting that most people don't realize. All of the 10 Commandments fall under the moral law. That's why we're still underneath the 10 Commandments. And here's what's interesting. When Jesus returns, we'll still keep the Sabbath because it's part of the moral law. Yeah, everyone with me? That's good teaching, Pastor Allen. Anyways, it's not what I'm teaching on. What I'm teaching on is the ways to create margin in your life. And the first way is the Sabbath. The Sabbath was designed to create margin in your life and reduce the stress, and also to keep your priorities straight. We don't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. 6 days a week, you're working to produce that bread. But you need to understand, you don't live by bread alone, but you live by every word that comes out of God's mouth. Yeah, this is what we live by, and we have to remind ourselves of that. So the Sabbath helps keep our priorities straight. If you're a parent, listen to me. It's more important to raise your children in church than it is to follow these little leagues that play baseball and basketball, football and softball on Sunday. I'm not saying it's wrong every once in a while, but I'm here to tell you, if your children don't wake up every Sunday knowing they're going to church, you're not raising them right. You know, I can remember growing up and Sunday would roll around and I never got up and said, "Are we going to church today?" No. It was Sunday. And on Sundays you go to church. And that's what your children ought to know.